we've had a number of running titles. I think this most recent one, though, that we've come up with is Open Data Contracts and Civic Innovation. To kind of go over who we are, I'm Brian Wilson, Tanner Rower, Joe Bearden, Paul Barham, and then we've also been working pretty closely with Des Greenwood at MIT, Jim Hazard, Common Core, and a number of others. And what we're trying to do is combine user data with system rules to generate user-specific agreements and facilitate the creation of legal components. So our underlying premise is that if lawyers can spend more time working on substantive portions of the law instead of just the mundane filling out the boilerplate type work that so many lawyers have gotten used to, we think that will help legal systems, it will help increase access to justice, and help create networks of people who are interested in doing the same thing. And sort of graphically, this is what we imagine it looking like. These are the people we've collaborated with so far on this, and yeah, that's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, Brian's our team lead, so he's just going to give a general overview and then let us take it from here. This USA graphic is a cool thing we came up with earlier this week. It really shows how a contract or an agreement can, if made as a collaborative effort, as you can see the little thought bubbles, that might not be realistic. We talked about those being more like direct wire transfer instead of thought bubbles, but I mean, we don't need to take a metaphor that far yet, I don't think. But the effort being collaborative is key because it enhances the practice of contract making as a whole. You make access available to lawyers, clients, and we'll talk about types of users here in a second, but you make that access available to these agreements available, and it improves client assistance, government efficiency, etc. in terms of the users using it. And the types of users, as you can see there at the bottom, could be just regular citizens, hackers, and internal workers at the government level, other city employees, academics, researchers, lawyers, and one of our future projects, and something we've worked a little bit on this semester, is developing use cases. We've had some difficulty transitioning with who our client is. Ashley Hand was mentioned earlier in this meeting. She was the former CIO here in Kansas City, and there's just now a new one hired. So once he gets involved, we could be adjusting again, but this semester, largely, one of our big tasks was finding out who our client is and how we can develop the project geared towards that client. And so that's something that's a little open-ended, but something that we're very capable of evolving with as well. At the beginning of at the core of this project, we have to decide kind of what an agreement is. And it's really interesting for those in computer science areas, the definition that we came up with, because it kind of can be thought of just a system of rules, which is basically like what coding is based off of. And so if you think about a contract split up into different clauses, and each clause represents a rule, and that really works as a template for a nice marriage between contracting or legal work and coding and computer science work. We start out with this, like Brian mentioned, there's boilerplate language, and so that's how we can actually make this happen. If every contract was inherently different, then this wouldn't exactly work, but there is like minimum standard language that goes into every different style of contract, so it makes this an interesting deal and makes us able to work on this. Text in and of itself may not seem easily movable and interchangeable, but when they're lumped into clauses, and we've created a clause bank on GitHub in a repository that we can access and we'll use moving forward to transition to use these chunks and place them into different contracts. This graphic here, I actually might want to let Joe explain because I think he understands a little bit more, but we used a metaphor with the spine and the interchanging parts.
Sure. The basic idea when you take any particular contract and you break it down, it's got particular component parts. And if you want the contract to do basically the same thing, but do some of the little parts of it differently. Then what you do is you cut it up into these clauses, and then you might develop, I guess I can use a mouse pointer here, can I? And then you might say, well, for this purpose we want this particular part of the contract to say this thing, and then for this part we want this thing, for this part we want this thing, depending on which function you want the contract to have. So for instance, your indemnification clause might change depending on the application of the contract. But you know, this part of the contract is going to stay the same, and then this part becomes interchangeable too. So what you end up with, instead of having just a boilerplate contract, is you have a really flexible set of tools that that can be determined by the builder or the end user depending on the particular circumstances. So we broke it down into the spine, and then the different clauses are kind of like interchangeable ribs, I guess, use a different metaphor.
This page represents, it's just, you can access this now, Open Data KC, it's just part of the city website. We can get a little bit more into that later. But another thing that's at the core of our project is viewing contracts as data. A lot of these projects here presented today involve the collection and usage of data, and really the start of this team, this project, will involve the deal between Cisco and the city, and the data sharing agreements. It's kind of transitioned for the purposes of the semester because we lost our client, as I mentioned, but to view contracts as a different collection of data is important to our mission. And then we've also been working on taking that data and transitioning it into a template, which I've mentioned template a couple times. For our purposes, it just means a basic structure as how we compose a certain contract or agreement. And then we will use that template and transfer and the data to transfer into certain cards that are very user-friendly. Again, this is in the future. We don't exactly, we have like a little bit of a mock-up here that you can see on the screen, but nothing too in detail. And the idea behind these templates is that they are interactive. You can interchange some of them, and you can see who's used what. You can see if there's been something like a clause or a certain agreement or a part of an agreement that's been litigated or overruled or anything like that. And then so the end of that section is basically combining the user info and system rules to form the agreements. So we have a Q&A mock-up that basically has the user input their information, like their name or the organization they're associated with, address, etc. And we use that in combination with our system rules to form the agreements. And we've used specific use cases with FERPA and HIPAA agreements that the system does as well. And this slide will be mostly addressed later. Paul has been helping us out a lot this semester to create the sort of function that sits on top of Common Core and helps us like combine, have a nice marriage between what we're trying to do and what Jim is trying to do. And again, you can talk to us later if you want to hear more about that. And this, again, that's actually probably about it for now. Joel, we have another component that we'll talk about in very much detail later, but it's not really necessary to get into right now because it will take some time. Joe's come up with a really cool part that we want to incorporate into our project as well. That's it.
Yeah, for the prototype jam though, for the rest of the day, we're mainly going to be working on this stage. We're going to actually try putting in different user information into this form and have it generate an agreement in a form that's a little bit more fluid than maybe this one is. So.
And I guess one last thing, I'm not sure where the slide was, but just a quick 15-second summation of the benefits of this. On an internal level, it increases in efficiency, transparency, improves client service, and that also makes the businesses or cities that use it hopefully more profitable. And then on an external level, you improve city access, so you can see who has forked or modified it, like I mentioned earlier, see if it's been litigated. And we really want to promote the principle of open data, making a lot more things available. And a new benefit that Paul and Brian realized in a presentation to somebody is like a consortium. Is at a consortium level, the cities and businesses would be more willing to exchange and then essentially helping each other, improving the organization experience and client experience as a whole. Thank you.
And looking forward to the arrival of the new Chief Information Officer, which I think a bunch of us have enthusiasm. If you go to his LinkedIn page, there's a paper that he wrote that described the last job he had when he was in Europe, collaborating, essentially creating tasking agreements between the Army and the State Department for the continent of Africa. And I think it's really a fascinating sort of model, functionally equivalent to the domain that you guys are exploring. So I think both in terms of understanding where he'll be coming from as a future ally and seeing a sort of higher level of realization, I would definitely encourage people to download that paper. It's only 7 or 8 pages.
Can you send me the link to that?
I can.
Question. Can you parse rhetoric and logic so these are boiled down to generally, commonly accepted languages, phrases? How can you shift a comma or a phrase and parse it and shade it or whatever to however you want? Because it's pretty rhetorically dense.
Yeah, there's actually a function on that exists within Common Core, which our system sits on top of, that allows you to track who's used it and who's modified it and how they've done that. But one of the things that we're hoping to do by taking and adopting the card approach is by allowing users to be able to look at the agreement, click on that particular clause, and then once they click on that clause, it'll show them things like most common uses of that clause, plain text of that clause, number of times the clause may have been litigated, and different things like that that help give better context to what those words actually mean within the context of the whole agreement. So, yeah.
The meta result of that is whether it's going to cost you more money at the end of the contract.
Well,
that's a whole different realm. That's a meta.
Yeah, and I'd venture a guess that by reducing the amount of time people actually spend filling out the forms, it would increase the amount of time they can spend doing substantive things like looking at the metadata below beneath the contract language and actually sort of defining it better and helping everybody get to a more common understanding of what these terms and these agreements mean. So.
Great. Thank you guys.
Okay, we have 2 more presentations of projects before we launch into playtime, where we will allow you to try